When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
To me, it was absolutely unimaginable that the foreign leader of an ally of the United States, somebody that we have supported for decades, would have the audacity to actually take us to public task, not diplomatic, not something behind the scenes, but in public, in your face chastisement, like a parent talking to a child. Now, if many of you are, I imagine most of you, especially if you're watching this, you're aware that yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu chose to actually publish a video to where he blasted the Biden administration, by extension, the United States. Now, we're going to talk today about some real problems with that. Just first of all, just the diplomatic viewpoint is really problematic for me, as you can probably tell already. But there are two other big time issues that need to be stressed here. And that is what is in America's interest and what is in Israel's interest. Can they make good on what they're trying to do? Is Benjamin Netanyahu right? Does he deserve an unquestioned, unchallenged free flow of weapons and ammunition from the United States? Is that his right? Because he's talking here as though it's his right, as though, how dare the United States not do everything I command them to do? Now, as you can see, that by itself is a major issue. We're not talking about cooperation here. We're talking about commands. That's the way he's trying to put it. He even went so far, again, like a parent scolding a child, said that Blinken told us that he's trying to get rid of these bottlenecks. I hope that's true, meaning that he doesn't know that it is, and he's barely covered over by saying, I think you're lying to me. I don't think that's the case. But this is actually, I don't want to get so caught up in the humiliation that Netanyahu gave to the United States, as bad as that is, because it's kind of masking a couple of other things that are even more important, both of which we're going to uncover today, because you need to know the truth underneath the emotion of this statement, underneath some of the things that have been said. And frankly, they're not looking very good for our side. And when I say our side, I mean both the United States and Israel. Both of us are coming off looking bad in this. And if changes are not made, it's going to be really problematic for us all. And in a worst case, and this is not that far of a worst case, Israel could find itself losing a war. Let that sink in for a second. And if you think that that's an exaggeration, you're mistaken. And I'm going to show you exactly why. But first of all, let's take a look at the first element of it. We have to ask the question, honestly, as an American especially, who's in charge here? Is it the United States? Are we a sovereign nation that says we have our government in place and our military industrial capacity to defend the United States, and will also help our allies where we're able to? But that primarily it's our interest that we have to negotiate, which every country on the planet is supposed to do. Every country on the planet, every government is supposed to prioritize the benefit of its country first. And once that's been established, then they can look at helping others in common cause and in allies and all that stuff. All good stuff if it's done well. If it's not done well, then you undercut your own security potentially and that of your supposed ally. And that, I think, is where we're in right now. Not headed. That's where we are right now. Now, first of all, again, to just bolster in who's actually in charge here, we're going to look at a few American officials who respond to this. First of all, KJP, the spokesman for the White House, was immediately asked, almost as soon as this was published, they're saying, hey, about Netanyahu's statement, here's what KJP had to say.
Has the administration been withholding weapons and ammunition for months, like Netanyahu seems to be saying?
Let me just start off by saying that we generally do not know what he's talking about. We just don't. A couple of things that I do want to add, and you're right, there was one particular shipment of munitions that was paused, and you've heard us talk about that many times. We continue to have these constructive discussions with Israelis for the release of that particular shipment that I just mentioned, and don't have any updates on that. There are no other pauses, no other pauses or holds in place. Everything else is moving in due process. That is coming from Secretary Blinken. You heard directly from him earlier today.
And we're going to hear what Blinken actually did have to say. And what you're going to see for him, and I'll show that in just a second, is kind of a continuation of that. I mean, here, instead of having, umbrage that how dare he talk to us like that? How dare he say something publicly like that? These things are better handled behind closed doors. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Next question. Something like that, something that shows I'm in charge here. We have the authority. We're going to handle this correctly. And we're going to make sure that our interests are taken care of. That's what should have happened here. And what we ought to be doing with those conversations behind the scenes is telling Israel, we're going to help you, but there are limits. And if you do this again, there's going to be a consequence. That's what we should be telling them. Because right now, Netanyahu thinks he has no limitations at all. He thinks that because of all of these groups that they have in the United States that are funding members of Congress, they have good friends on the Hill, they have good friends in the media, that they're just going to give them cover, that they're going to take Netanyahu's side. He is gambling on that the media and members of Congress are going to take his side against our government, and he feels that he can just blow through us and do that. Now, when you see responses like this from the White House, then it seems like maybe Netanyahu's onto something. Maybe he is running the show here, and that his risk, maybe from his perspective, is a good one and may well pay off. And in fact, let's just jump to that one, because here was Secretary Blinken literally hours after Netanyahu made his blast. Here's how he responded.
I'm not going to talk about what we said in diplomatic conversations. I can just say again that we have a commitment to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself against a whole variety of threats. Gaza is part of it, but it far surpasses Gaza in terms of the threats they face. The president's committed to that. We continue to move these different cases through our system on regular order. We have one case that the president's talked about publicly, about the 2,000-pound bombs and concerns that we have about them being used in densely populated areas. That remains. We continue to work through that, but there's been no change in our posture, which our posture is, again, to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself across these many threats. Many of the systems that are moving through our system are ones that have been on order for, in some cases, years. It takes a long time to move these things, and a number of the things that are going to Israel won't get there for years. That is the nature of the way this works. But it's regular order, with the exception of that one system that we've talked about many times in public.
I mean, that was almost like an apology. He was almost like saying, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to make Netanyahu mad. Almost like, again, a kid who's being abused by an abusive parent, like Netanyahu was trying to establish. Looks like he succeeded. Because instead of Blinken, again, showing some backbone and showing some moxie, and saying, yeah, I heard what he said, disagree with it strongly, going to handle it behind the scenes. Next question. Something like that. Something that communicates that he's in charge. But instead of showing that he's in charge, he's he's apologizing to anyone who's listening that, I don't want anybody who supports Israel to be thinking that I'm not going to give Netanyahu everything you want. So we're really trying to, you see what I'm saying? His body language is crucial. It's vital here, and it's very, very clear. You saw from the White House spokeswoman, and you saw from the Secretary of State, no backbone. You saw nobody standing up for the United States' position here. And listen, there are some valid reasons why some of these weapons have been held up. If there is just a one shipment being held up, I'm going to show you a map of the destruction of the Gaza Strip here in a little while. and you're going to see there's lots of red dots everywhere. Buildings have been wiped out and destroyed, and infrastructure has been systematically eliminated, et cetera. And you're going to see in the bottom where Rafah, we've been talking about that for a better part of a couple of months or so. You're going to see there's not as many red dots down there because we haven't given them all the weapons that they've needed, all the ammunition that they've needed to wipe that part out. So it hasn't been destroyed as much. And it's starting to look like possibly one or both of two things. That Netanyahu is furious that these weapons have been needed because he needs these really heavy bombs to wipe out all the infrastructure there. And it sounds like he hasn't gotten it. Even Blinken there and KJP both said that there's, one shipment that we haven't gotten. But here's the thing, and we've seen this throughout. Netanyahu makes a statement. The United States makes a statement. Biden himself will say what our standards are and what our objectives are and what we want to be careful about not killing innocent people and not wanting to provide weapons to kill innocent people. And instead of being firm on that, we're being wishy-washy and almost like hoping that Netanyahu doesn't get mad that he'll do something else. And instead of being firm and saying, okay, it's not just a 2,000-pound bombs. I'm not going to give you anything if you don't change course. And instead, they have been. You remember Biden said that it's a red line, and if Ukraine or if Israel goes into Rafah, we're going to cut off shipment. Israel went into Rafah. But Netanyahu said, I don't care what you're saying. We're going to do what we want to do. So they went in with tanks and several other things in the middle of Rafah. And other than holding that one shipment, nothing else has happened. You didn't hear Biden come back on and say anything. He didn't. And when asked specifically about what about the red line, you said it's going to Rafah. Now they just changed it. Oh, well, I mean, that wasn't the red line. And I'm not actually going to hold weapons and ammunition that they need to defend themselves. So all you're doing is holding one category basically back of weapons while Israel continues to go on and methodically still pulverize the area and still continue to kill so many innocent people. And you haven't seen any change in their policies. So that's one issue that Netanyahu seems to be mad, but he's still kind of trying to go and do it with the weapons that they have, with the ammunition that we still are providing. As Blinken admitted there, we're still giving him all this other stuff. It's just not enough. So it could be that Netanyahu's just angry because he didn't get the biggest bombs to cause the most destruction in the shortest amount of time. That would be consistent with his behavior and his intentions here. But there could also be an additional issue. And you've heard me talk about it a little bit here in recent weeks, and it's starting to pick up some steam. There is evidence that the Israeli Defense Forces have already decided they are going to attack into Lebanon, that they're going to attack Hezbollah and try to push them back. I think it's about 25 kilometers or so to the Litani River, which is from an area from which they can no longer range normally with artillery fire into northern Israel. Now, for your knowledge, there has been a lot of flare up here recently. I've been on a number of news shows talking about some of the flare up in activities where legitimately last week, Hezbollah launched in one day 200 rockets into the northern part of Israel. And of course, people are saying, look, see, they're being aggressive. They're being belligerent, and Israel's got to do what it needs to take care of its security. What they're not telling you on the Western media, what they're not telling you in hardly any of the stories that I read, unless it's buried very deeply, is that Israel assassinated a senior Hezbollah leader prior to that, the day before, if I'm not mistaken, or it might have even been just hours later that Hezbollah responded. So Israel took the fight first to them. And of course, this stuff has been going back and forth across the border almost from the beginning. It's just maintained at a fairly low and sustained level. It hasn't gotten too big by either side. But Israel took it to a general and assassinated another one. And they've done that many times. And this time, Hezbollah hit back hard with a large number of fires. Well, now then that's putting more impetus to Israel to say, we got to get rid of this. Here's the thing. That's not the only way to get rid of it. Hezbollah has said from the outset, and again recently, all of these attacks are tied to Israel's attack into Gaza. And if they stop the war in Gaza, if they have a ceasefire, Hezbollah is going to have a ceasefire. Listen, folks, Hezbollah doesn't want to get into a war with Israel. They don't, because they know that Israel has extraordinary firepower, especially if the United States gives them all the weapons that they need. but they are also not willing to take the weapons and ammunition and capability that they have while their co-religionists right across the border are continuing to get wiped out, especially the innocent civilians. They've made that very clear. So if we want the Hezbollah to stop, then we need to have a ceasefire and bring this war to a stop. The U.S. has said we want a ceasefire. We sponsored a UNSC Security Council resolution to have a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. Had no teeth in it, and we haven't done anything to actually hold Israel to their feet to the fire. So we haven't required them to do it, and they haven't. We've said that we wanted to. We've said we want a two-state solution. We said we want something that's going to happen so that there's a chance for the people of Palestine to have a peaceful future, for the Israeli people to have security, stability, and a peaceful future. We want that for both sides. That's what we say with our words. But then what we do with our actions is whatever Netanyahu has told us, or nearly everything. But you see, Netanyahu's not satisfied with 90% compliance. He wants absolute doing whatever we say. He wants us to be completely submissive to everything he says, and he will be angry. And now he's given voice to it if he doesn't get his way. If he does what it appears that he's trying to do, which is take the war into Lebanon, then he's going to have a lot of problems. And what the second possibility with this tirade is that he wants an unlimited number of ammunition and weapons, not just to blow up the Rafah in the southern Gaza, but because he knows that if he's going to go into Lebanon, he's going to need a lot of ammunition, weapons, air defense interceptors, a bunch of stuff, and at a high level. And let me make sure that you're aware of this, folks. Israel going into Lebanon isn't just an expansion of the war, as bad as that would be, and the possibility that it could get us drawn into it, the possibility it could get Iran drawn into it. They may not stay passively by if the war is carried into Lebanon, because it is their biggest client state, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they may not stay passive either. But Israel cannot, and this is so important for you to get, Israel cannot conduct this war unless they have massive and sustained ammunition and weapons support from the United States. Now, how much weapons and ammunition do you think we have? And we're talking like interceptors for the Iron Dome, artillery rounds, tank rounds, and we're going to hear from somebody else who's going to detail why that's so important. Do we have that? If you haven't been watching all of our shows, you may have noticed that the United States just signed President Biden a few days ago a long-term support to Ukraine to give these same categories of things. Now, how big do you think our support and our capabilities are in our own inventories, our own 120 millimeter tank rounds, our own interceptor missiles, our own artillery? We already know that doing everything we can, there's not enough capacity to give Ukraine all of it once. And now that you're talking about another spurt of a possible high intensity conflict from the Israeli side that's going to demand even more to that. And I can just guarantee you and flatly say it categorically, you will dig into our wartime stocks. You will deplete our capacity to fight wars if we need to. That's why I'm telling you so emphatically, this is an American national security issue. Our interest must predominate. The United States cannot, must not deplete our ammunition supplies for two nations in high-intensity conflict because we don't have the capacity to replace it. And should we need it, should we actually get into a war somewhere, we won't have enough to defend ourselves. Let that sink in for a moment, folks. And listen, I know a lot of people who are watching this probably already angry because I'm saying something besides just whatever Netanyahu says, whatever Israel says, we should just give it without consideration. I'm sorry if you're upset, but listen, you should be upset. You need to be upset, not at me. You need to be upset, first of all, at Netanyahu, or first of all, at our leadership, and secondly, at Netanyahu, because they're putting your security at risk. And I assure you, there are plenty of people around the world who would like to take advantage of that, and in the wrong set of circumstances, may. Let's don't give them that chance. But let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's what Daniel Hagari, one of the spokesmen for Israel, has said just yesterday.
Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation, one that could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region. Hezbollah is jeopardizing the future of Lebanon so that it can be a shield for Hamas.
Yeah, that's bold and brash talk if you have the capacity to back it up. But as this former Lebanese general said on a regional television network, there's more things involved than that.
Let's say that you have full-fledged war over Lebanon. You need the army, you need the weapon, and the ammunition. And you fight the war with, the Iron Dome. You fight the war with the Merkava, 120 millimeters ammunition, and you fight the war with artillery. You fight the war with drones, and all of that depends on the aids from the United States of America. And then if you want to go into full-fledged war and the regional war, what would be the situation or the stance of Iran? In April, we witnessed some, scenario for that. Hezbollah has its strategic depths, has the weaponry, has the experience, has a system. It is like maybe the most important non-state actor in the world. And Hezbollah works under the auspices of Hezbollah wins if he doesn't lose, but Israel loses if it doesn't win.
Let me reiterate that last point. That was so important what he just said there. Hezbollah will win if they just don't lose. But Israel, if they attack in there and don't win, they lose. So they must win. And let me just point out some things. This is incredibly difficult. Hezbollah is not Hamas. They have significantly more firepower. They have a lot larger and a lot more accurate and a lot heavier payload missile force. Hamas had a bunch of rockets that were basically almost like bottle rockets or something like you may see on the 4th of July. It just kind of went that way, and they're terribly inaccurate. Their payloads are very small. Hezbollah is not like that. They have a huge, some say upwards of 150,000 missiles and rockets of various types, some of which are quite modern and very accurate. They have troops that are very well trained. And listen, they fought a war against Israel in 2006. Israel invaded into Lebanon, and it was an inconclusive kind of fight. It didn't last too long. Israel eventually withdrew back into their side, and they caused lots and lots of harm, but they did not defeat the Hezbollah. In the intervening time, Hezbollah has spent lots of times making an incredibly difficult defensive lines from the border all the way back to the Litani River. So if Israel thinks it's going to go in and drive Hezbollah back, they just apparently are not keeping track of exactly how hard this fight is, because Hezbollah has also been paying attention to what happened in the Russia-Ukraine war. They saw how Russia's 5 defensive lines completely broke the teeth of the Ukrainian offense that had all the Western weapons, all the Western ammunition, all the missiles, the drones, all of that, electronic warfare, engineering, everything. And they broke their teeth on it. I assure you that Lebanon is paying, that the Hezbollah in Lebanon is paying a lot of attention to that. And they have very intricate long-term defensive positions. And instead, the Russians had like 6 to 9 months to prepare. These folks have had almost 2 decades of time to prepare. So they will be ready if Israel comes into attack. If Hezbollah is not going to attack into Israel, there's virtually no chance to do that because they would be slaughtered. If they come out of their defensive positions and go into Israel, then they're open targets and they would be easy to destroy. And Israel would almost certainly win. It's very little chance that Hezbollah would have an invasion of Israel, other than potentially some small incursions in the north to cause trouble, or maybe even to prompt Israel to attack into it. Because the way that Hezbollah can win is by not losing. And if they draw Israel into their defensive positions, they can inflict a huge casualty count on them. And it's just, I mean, Israel saw how hard it was in 2006, and it'll be much harder now, especially after they have conducted almost 9 months of warfare in the southern part, in the Gaza Strip, and where there is still an active war. Basically, Israel would be launching a 2-front war, because the Hamas in the Gaza Strip would definitely rise up and cause as much trouble as they could in the rear of the Israeli Defense Forces. You can count on it. It's guaranteed that they would certainly do that. Netanyahu is wrong if he thinks that he can do that, if he thinks he can coerce the United States into giving him all the weapons that he wants, and then that his army would go forward and somehow they would win. And listen, you've heard me on this channel ever since this war started. I said that Netanyahu has his country on a path militarily that cannot succeed. It cannot. It's been shown. He's graphically depicted exactly what I've said so far is what we see here. I mean, the powerful disparity between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas is off the chart. It's far bigger than the disparity between Russia and Ukraine. And yet you're seeing after 9 months of war, they still can't win. Just like we didn't win after 20 years of war in Afghanistan against an enemy who is also extremely inferior to us in a technological capacity. But this isn't a traditional war. And Israel is trying to fight with conventional forces against an irregular enemy who has different objectives. And they're harming themselves, and therefore they're building up more and more insecurity. And I'm going to show you exactly why that is. That's not just my opinion. There's some recent scholarship that was released, ironically, the day before Netanyahu's screed against the United States. I'm going to show you that in just a second. But first of all, I want to show you something that Bernie Sanders said. So if some of the American leaders were pretty feckless about this, there's one who isn't.
What is also inconceivable is that in the last 8 months, Israel has killed some 35,000 Palestinians, wounded some 80,000, over 60% of whom are women and children. They have completely decimated the housing stock of Gaza, the medical system of Gaza, the educational system of Gaza, all of which is to me inconceivable. And right now, as we speak, according to the World Health Organization, you've got thousands of children who are suffering from malnutrition. And children are already in Gaza starved to death. All of this, by the way, is in violation of American and international law. So to me, what is inconceivable is for the United States to give another nickel to the right-wing extremist Netanyahu government who is going to war against not just Hamas, but the entire Palestinian people. That's inconceivable.
That's and just a couple of points there of his comments here. The way Israel is going about its business violates very clearly American law and international law. I know, again, lots in America don't want to listen to that. They don't want to hear it. They want to go back to October 7th. They want to say all these things that the Israelis suffered, and there's been a lot of them. Gary, if you can throw that video up there, because I don't want to minimize the Israeli loss here and the things that happened to them on October 7th. It's legitimate. I mean, here's one of the memorials that are set up in Israel, and you just see this sea of people that were murdered on October 7th, and they deserve justice. The people of Israel deserve peace. I strongly believe that all of the people of Israel should be able to live in peace and have a stable future. But it's not just the Israelis, it's also the Palestinians. And so for all of these, and those resonate well on American television, and they pull at our heartstrings because, some of them were going to concerts or just living in their houses and were just attacked in the most barbaric ways. And our hearts go out to them. We just can't imagine the barbarity that went into that. But folks, that's not the only barbarity. You cannot say because of what happened to Israel that everything is on the table in retaliation and that the innocent people in Palestine don't care. Folks, this is what Bernie Sanders was talking about here. I mean, kids are starving to physical, literal death. The malnutrition is off the charts. I think that the number of trucks, the aid trucks that are required to keep the population properly fed and nourished is about 500 trucks per day. Last I saw, they're getting about 80. So there's not enough to feed everybody. There's not enough for anybody to get enough. So everybody is suffering malnutrition, which is going to have permanent results in a lot of people. That violates American national interest. That violates American law. You can't just wantonly kill a bunch of people in going after your objectives. Now, many say, oh, well, it's just collateral damage. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it works in war. We do it. Our officials have been saying that somehow to cover over. No, we don't. And let me show you graphically. Here's a map of the Gaza Strip that's very recently put together. All these red dots you see there is the destruction of the civilian infrastructure in there. And you can see this is not collateral damage. This is methodical wiping out. Bernie Sanders mentioned this in there. Their hospitals, all the universities have been wiped out. All the hospitals have either been destroyed or rendered inoperable. They don't allow them to get enough medical supplies in there. Some whole categories they won't even allow. Children in the Gaza Strip are having amputations done without anesthesia in many cases. And you get into water treatment facilities, food processing, farming, all of it has been wiped out. Secretary of State Blinken, 3 or 4 months back, I think it was, maybe even longer, came on and admitted that 100% of the population of the surviving people, which is about 2-point-something million people, are now dependent on 100% food aid. 100% of the people, 100% dependent on stuff coming in. They have lost the ability to sustain their lives because Israel has methodically wiped it out. That violates the laws of war. So international laws have been completely violated. It is proper for the United States to say, you're not going to use our weapons to do this kind of methodical destruction. Here's the thing. And again, I know some of you are really angry about this because you don't want any kind of prohibitions. You want to be able to say, like many people in Israel do, all of the Palestinians none of them are innocent. They voted for Hamas in 2007. And somehow you think that because they voted for Hamas, that now that they're all culpable in whatever this tiny little leadership does, that now all the people should die, that little children should die. Gary, put those videos back up there again just a second ago that you were showing there. Because what Hamas did, does this child here that they're showing that are looking for food, do they deserve to starve to death? And I listen, there are a lot worse pictures I could show here, but I think YouTube would probably block us if we did. But you need to know that there's lots of videos out there of just maimed children and women and old people who are dying, not just the Hamas fighters, all kinds of people. None of them deserve this any more than any of those people in the Israeli video that we showed at the beginning. None of those people deserve to be killed. None of those people deserve what happened there. Neither do the Palestinian side. And it is required, it is obligated for the United States to say, we're going to uphold international law. We're going to uphold American law. And we're going to require anyone who uses our assets to do it. We should not apologize for it. We should not be embarrassed about it. And Israel would benefit if we had the backbone to stand up and do what's right. And let me show you why. So I just repeated something I've said many times, that Netanyahu has his country on a path that won't succeed. There's new scholarship out that came by a retired IDF colonel, Ron Tira, ironically, the day before Netanyahu's statement on the 16th of June, where he says Israel's conduct of the war after October 7th is this carelessness or wrongdoing. And in this, he says a few important things. Gary, if you can toss that up there. I'm going to read part of this here because it's so important here. In the middle part here, you see the war must therefore be conducted by a coalition. Indeed, the war began with an unprecedented alignment of the United States, the West, and moderate Arab countries on Israel's side. But Israel's refusal to conduct a dialogue with the international partners on the nature of the regime that will replace Hamas, foot dragging on the humanitarian issue, extremist messaging, and poor management of the legal dimensions have resulted in a severe damage to Israel's legitimacy and ability to harness the international community's help in achieving its war objectives. So you can see there what I'm talking about. This is an IDF general, this colonel. He had 40 years of experience in Israel, former fighter pilot, someone who loves Israel. I assure you, this guy wants peace for Israel as much or more than anybody in Israel. And I am right next to him. I'm in complete agreement with him that I want to see Israel people get security. This isn't going to do it. Then continue on. Bring that back up if you could, Gary. The damage was done with no associated gains. All the things that he's talking about up there about how Israel is ignoring humanitarian concerns. He's ignoring any possibility of having Hamas having the Palestinian people have a future and hope. He then goes on to say that the damage was done with no associated gains, as Israeli's government conduct has steered it away from rather than toward achieving the goals of war. Unless there is a profound change in the way the government conducts itself, and if it's not already too late, Israel's situation in the coming years will be worse than it was before. Do you see what's going on here, folks? I get that because of October 7th, because of our decades of history of supporting Israel, that we want Israel to be able to do whatever it wants to do, that we want them to be able to survive and to be able to thrive in a peaceful security. And the thought is, well, the Israeli government, of course, knows what's best for it. So let's just do what they say. They don't. And you also rarely see on American television, and I saw one a couple of days ago, there are some massive protests against the Netanyahu government by Jews, by the Jewish population. So there is a lot of Jews who support Netanyahu and want him to keep doing some of these things. That's a fact. And I won't pretend otherwise. But there is a significant portion of the Jewish population that is adamantly opposed to what he's doing here. Strongly opposed. And however Israel navigates its stuff is for Israel to discuss. And I don't tell them what to do. I don't suggest to them how they should manage the different sides of their political arrangements. That's for them to decide. What's for us to decide, though, is how we support international law, how we support American law, and what we want to do to try to help Israel. Colonel Tira is right, is they need some external help. And if they're going on this area that's hell-bent on leading themselves to insecurity, we can't support that. We can't enable that. If Israel chooses to attack into Lebanon, we need to tell them point blank, categorically, you do that, you do it without our help. And if they choose to do it, that would be absurd and foolish. But if they do, they're an independent country. We can't stop them from doing it. But we can try and help them by saying, we're not going to enable you to do something. That's like someone, if they're on drugs and they're addicted to drugs, and you say, they say, I want some fentanyl. Well, you know that if you give them fentanyl, they could die. They could literally die from an overdose. And you say, well, but they say they want it, so I'm going to give it to them. That would be absurd. You'd go to jail if you did something like that. But in a certain sense, we're doing something similar here. Because if Israel attacks into Lebanon, they have a possibility of drawing Iran into the war, because Lebanon is their closest ally. We don't know that would happen for sure, but even if Iran stayed out, as I've just showed you, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Israel to open a second front and to fight two fronts wars, one where they're doing lots of stuff illegal and they have lost so much support in the United States and in the Western world, and definitely in the Middle Eastern world already. And if they expand into Lebanon, folks, there's no guarantee that some of these others, like Turkey, who's made lots of incendiary comments about Israel, there's no guarantee that they wouldn't also take some action. You wouldn't think that is, but we are rolling the dice and playing with fire to think that no one would, whether Turkey or Egypt or Jordan, that none of these other regimes would do anything, even Saudi Arabia. We are playing with increasingly small amounts of credibility. The United States is. If we keep thinking nobody will do anything we don't want them to, and just keep allowing Israel to do whatever they want to do, no matter how much it violates our own laws, no matter how many innocent people are killed, and no matter how foolish militarily such a prospect would be, because they're not going to succeed. They didn't succeed in 2006. They fought an inconclusive war and then stopped. Why does anybody think that after almost 18 years of additional time to prepare, that somehow Israel will succeed after having already exhausted and lost many of their troops in casualties over 8 months of war, that they would succeed this time? I mean, it's irrational to think that. It's illogical, and it's just absurd. They won't. So let's get back to doing something that makes some sense. That's what we ought to do. I just don't know what's going to happen with this. I fear that it's going to go bad. I hope, though, that enough people can talk some sense into Israel. I hope that whether it's Secretary of State Blinken whether it's the President Biden, could find a backbone and do something that's going to not harm Israel. Don't give Netanyahu what he's asking for, because he's taken his country on a suicide path. He's taken his country down a path that in the probably the best case is going to cause it lots of harm and set up long-term insecurity. That's probably the best case. The worst case is that he spawns a regional war. And now it's a lot of people against him, and we don't have the ammunition to support him with everything that he would need. That's the worst case scenario we need to avoid at all cost. And that is your deep dive for today. Folks, join us this afternoon. We're going to have Doug McGregor back on at 2 p.m. Eastern time, a little over an hour from now. And like always, you don't want to miss this. Doug really brings some illumination into the situation with what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, with Putin's recent trip to North Korea and what all that means, both for that war and for our own interest in the region as well, because we got some trouble there too. Doug's going to help talk to us about that. Thank you very much for watching us today. Be sure and like and subscribe, folks. You hear me say that a lot, but looking at the percentages, about 60% of the folks watch this show, but they don't subscribe to it. And it is so important because that helps YouTube give us the algorithms we need to expand this message. And lots of people need to hear this message. So thank you. We'll see you in an hour or so with Doug McGregor.